46 days ago, my BMW M4 blew up.
Every single flap that's bearing, buddy.
And we still don't know why. Now, last night, my good friend Johnny and I trailered my M4 all the way over to Silver Star Automotive, and today begins the day of tearing down that car to get it back on the road. Now, originally the plan was to pull the M4 into my shop and rebuild it here. Well, last week, Silver Star Automotive gave me a call, and they said they wanted to help us get the M4 on the road a lot faster than we could on our own. Now, the reason that is because Silver Star Automotive has all the tools we need. They have BMW certified techs and all the resources needed to be able to get this car on the road a lot faster than us. So I said yes, because I know that you and I both want this car on the road very soon. So let's go ahead, get a cold start on the Huracan and head over to Silver Star Automotive. We're not gonna take the rear wheel drive cars because it snowed last night. It looks like it just started snowing again. Winter decided to make an appearance almost 2 months after Christmas. Now today's gonna be a long day, so I need to go in and get some energy drinks. Hands down the best flavor. And we got Silver Star right here. Yep. This motor is kind of toast. So next plan is the M4 is sitting right here. We're gonna roll it out. We're gonna get this charger out of the way, and then we're gonna actually set up some lights here. That way it's good enough lighting to be able to see everything that we're doing. And we'll flip the M4 around and begin this job. I was going to pull this motor at home by pulling it out from the fronts and just disassembling the whole front end and doing it that way with a cherry picker. But since we're at Silver Star, they have a big table. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna lower the engine down on the table with the transmission disconnected from the drive shaft. And they said it should be cut and dry because these motors, funny enough, are made to come out. So we finally got the M4 on the lift. We needed to get some nice lighting because Scott wanted to look pretty in here. So this is Scott, the owner of Silver Star. So he's gonna be helping us out too with this. So is Thomas, but Thomas is over there right now. You met him in last video. But the first thing we gotta do is get the AC basically flushed, and then we gotta get the coolant out. We already drained the oil, so that's one step marked off the list. And yeah, like I said, this motor is built to come out. So let's see how good it actually comes out. Now this is my first motor I ever blew up, which also means it's the first motor I've ever taken out. So of course, I took off the stuff that I was sure needed to come off, while Scott took off the stuff that I didn't really know much about. So for me, I went ahead and started taking off the wheels because I knew that the suspension is gonna come out with the motor and we don't want the wheels attached to it. While I was working on the wheels, Scott was getting the oil cooler disconnected. Then after that was draining, we went back to the top of the car, disconnected all the coolant lines from the motor that connected the radiator, the heat exchanger, and some of the plugs that connected the fan to the motor. While Scott from Silver Star was taking off the rest of the coolant lines, I decided to take off the catch can and found out my PCV hose was broken. So add that to the list of things to replace. Next up, we had to disconnect the brakes and hang them to the side. And then came the exhaust, but before I could pull that off, I had to take off the brace and the diffuser, and then I started wiggling off some pieces. Now in this process, I just disconnected as much of my Grail exhaust as needed because I didn't want to have to take off the muffler and lay it to the side and make the shop even more messy, because the only thing we needed to get to was the drive shaft so we can disconnect it from the trans. Once the drive shaft was disconnected and we made sure all the harnesses were unplugged, we could then get the motor ready to be dropped. All right, well, we spent a good chunk of the day working on disconnecting everything. Harnesses are out, the trans support bolts are out. All we gotta do now is just disconnect suspension and then do some subframe bolts, and this motor should come out with the transmission. Well, here it is, an S55 and a DCT out of the car. This is so trippy seeing it not inside the car. And before even taking apart the motor, there's already a lot of broken stuff. We got transmission mounts just gone, so we gotta get a new transmission mount. Motor mounts, might as well upgrade those while we're here. High pressure fuel pump, I might need to upgrade that anyway, given that I'm wanting to reach certain power levels that mean I might need more fuel. Scott thinks I spun a rod bearing, so we will find out pretty soon. But
too much material.
Yeah. There were a few there's some fingernail sized chunks in there. I think we actually found one over here I put on top of my lunch. Check this out. I was just hanging out in the oil filter housing. So there's a lot to do still, but this is one of the harder parts to do first. I mean, putting it back in won't be that bad, but I do think since the engine's out of the car, it'll be a lot easier to do a single turbo kit out of the car versus putting it all back in and then taking out the turbos and all that. So yeah, gotta figure out all of that too. This parts list is gonna be very expensive. But now the next plan is we're gonna reconvene tomorrow. We're gonna pull the transmission from the engine and then start the teardown on the engine. So far there are a few things we need to order: transmission mount, motor mounts, possibly a new auxiliary pump because the mount on mine's broken, and a new PCV pipe. This broke and it connects to my catch can. So 4 things so far. That's not too bad considering the state of the car. Look at this car. It's covered in snow. It was funny today while we were working on the M4, people were coming by and being like, "Is Jake here?" And they were like, "I'm surprised he's driving this car in the snow." Little do they know, this is my most practical car out of the 4. Now on Friday, the car's gonna get a lot louder. Well, the amount of snow we got last night was a lot more than yesterday. Look at this. Not even 20 feet away from my shop, and snow is piled up almost to the front. Let's get to the car wash and then get the Silver Star. Next stop, Silver Star, to begin the teardown process of this motor to find out what exactly failed. Yep. That wash was absolutely useless. Well, here we are, right where we left off yesterday. So now the plan is we're gonna take apart the engine. We gotta get the transmission off of it and the subframe off. We already took some good pictures of it, that way we don't forget where everything was routed. But yeah, this is going to be very interesting because I have no idea what we're gonna find. But hopefully we find out that the engine is still okay and we can reuse it, just replace internals, because that would be the cheapest and probably the fastest route. And here we are again, taking off the stuff I know needs to come off. So I started taking off the downpipes, and then I started working on the turbos, while Scott was working on the other side of the engine, taking off the pulleys, the water pump, the intake manifold, the alternator, the ECU, and other loose wires. Now these turbos are 77,000 mile turbos, which means the studs had a little bit of rust on them. So I had to spray some penetrant on there to be able to get them off without hurting the studs or the threads. While the penetrant was working, I decided to take off the oil feed lines, and there goes turbo number 1. Finally, turbo number 2. I'm so happy I'm putting on this turbo kit with the motor out. Next up, I took out the oil thermostat and the oil filter housing, and I made a little discovery. There is a good sized chunk. I don't know if it'll focus, but there it is. It was stopping the inlet from closing. It was stopping this from closing. Look at that. Whoa. We're gonna find some carnage, I think. I think this is not gonna be that great to look at. After we stopped admiring how much metal was in my oil, we then locked up the timing. That way when we tried to take the crank hub off, we wouldn't accidentally spin a piston into an intake valve and then bend an intake valve. While Scott was working on the timing in the crank hub, I started disconnecting the transmission from the motor. And then once we got the crank hub out, next step was to get the top end off the bottom end, which meant getting the head bolts out. And then after all the bolts were loosened, we could then take off the top end. But then I made a discovery. All right, well, we got the top end off. And as you see, it's on the ground. And I noticed something. Inside here, when we got it off, it is a little damp. And I think it could have been the charge cooler. There's a little bit of coolant right in here. And this is where the charge cooler connects to the J-pipe. So it very well could have been charge cooler failure. Other thing is, it was raining the night that the car blew up. So potentially, whoever was driving, because 2 people drove it at different parts of the night, went through a huge puddle and it eventually just took it out. But here is the damage. So this is cylinder 2. And you can see how the piston comes all the way up a little bit past the head, right? This is cylinder 5. And cylinder 5 needs to be at the exact same length as this cylinder up here. And it's not even past the metal. So there's something wrong with cylinder 5. However, it doesn't look bad on the cylinder walls. So the motor does look savable so far. But now next plan is we gotta take the engine off the subframe and the trans, flip it upside down, and check out rod bearings. Because what I think it is a rod bearing is ovaled and it's on the short side right now. Also, if you wiggle the piston, they're sometimes supposed to go like this, but if you go like this, it like clicks and clanks. And if you're going at higher RPMs, it could have made the knocking sound that we heard. So now I gotta get this on the engine stand and flip it over. Now this discovery kind of sucked, and it meant that it was my fault that this car blew up. It could have easily been prevented by me keeping the car in the garage that night, not giving the keys to a couple friends in the rain, or I could have been more responsible and kept a closer eye on my coolant and noticed the little bits of coolant that my charge cooler was leaking. But hindsight's 20/20, and there's not much we can do now except get this car fixed and not let that situation happen again. It's raining. Sparkles. Really? Oh my gosh. Yeah, so this is interesting. So we got a ton of metal hidden down there. I got some in my hand if you can't see that. And there's a plastic piece. What do you think the plastic could be from? Like anything in here maybe? Something here?
I'm wondering if maybe the
Guide?
a guide or the something internally in the oil pump.
Yeah, that's weird. Okay, so we're gonna keep pulling more stuff off. The next thing is to pull this whole oil pump system out. Right? That is a big metal piece. We're gonna save that and the plastic. That's, yeah.
Yeah, look at her.
Ooh. So it gets that different color because it gets so hot?
Yep.
Look at 5.
Oh yeah, that's a
That's a brownie. He
look
woke
at
up
that.
early.
Wow, I've
And,
never seen that failure
last
before.
night.
So yeah, the M4 spun a rod bearing. As you can see, Scott said these are 2 bearings smushed together, and they usually connect, but they don't connect like this. And this is the rod end cap, and yeah, that's a normal one, and that is a messed up one. Got off the phone with Remy. He said we probably need a new crank. Scott said so as well, unless maybe we're going stock power. But even then, if we remachined it, it would be somewhat out of balance and it could just fail again. So new crank is definitely in the works, but let me show you a little magic trick real quick. We're just gonna go like this inside the oil pan. Just go like that. Yeah.
Destruction.
It's not good. So what does that mean? What's next? Well, honestly, I gotta sit down and think about every single part we need. All the one-time torque bolts, all the new gaskets, taking the motor to the machine shop, timing sets, the list goes on. I have a list on my phone, but I think it's like a quarter or an eighth of what we actually need. So this is gonna be the very expensive part. But hey, at least the motor's out, so on the bright side, the turbo kit's gonna be easier to install. Well, now we know what happened to the M4. Don't exactly know what brought it all to the States. Could have been failed charge cooler, could have been a giant puddle, who knows? But what we do know is now we have to fix it. Now, I called Colby at INW Performance because he's been in the process of building a few new motors for people as well. And he said, don't mess with this. Don't get a new crank and put it into this casing, just get a whole new short block, because with BMWs and their tolerances, it is very, very common to get your whole motor redone, put it in the car, and it will last about one oil change, then throw a rod bearing again. So that leads us to the next thing. Might be looking at buying a new short block, which would cost around $300 to $3,500, or potentially getting a whole new motor. That way there's no chances of any metal really going through it. Obviously we'd inspect the motor just to double check, do rod bearings in that motor, rods, pistons, and crank hub, head studs, basically get that motor built up to what we wanted this motor to be, put it in the car and do that. Because even a new crank for this car costs $2,500. That's just the crank. And then you have to put it in, they have to take the machine shop, they have to get it all dialed in to make sure it's at the right specs. So yeah, that is where we are at right now. Just trying to figure out what parts to get and how soon we can get them. As far as that, if we just get the short block done, we can just get this head resurfaced and run that. The cams are a little bit scored, but honestly, the scoring looks like a typical BMW with this many miles. So yeah, a lot of decisions to make, and I would like to get it done in a short amount of time because I don't want Silver Star, nice people that they are, to stare at this hunk of junk for longer than they have to. So yeah, that's where we're at. The M4 spun a rod bearing, and it actually spun it pretty good, enough to make us probably look at a new used motor. With that being said, I think that's gonna be the end of today's video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like, and if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and the bell. Go ahead and check out Silver Star, give them a follow, because this won't be the last video you see with them. We still gotta get the parts for the car and put it back in the car. But there's gonna be a journey, a very expensive journey. I have a lot of phone calls to make tonight. In the next video, you'll find out how much money it's gonna take to get this car back on the road. I'll see you guys next time. Drive safe.